Hi, I'm Tony Lair. In this video, I'll be showing you how to do progressive coloring on letters using the shading blending technique with Eco Flo leather dyes. First, set up your workspace. You will need good quality, small, round, fine point, natural or synthetic brushes. I prefer round number 4 sables. Ideally, you should use a separate brush for each color group. You will also need a container of clean water, a dye palette, eyedroppers, paper towels, and practice leather pieces cut from the same leather as your project. For more information on supplies and help with setting up your workspace, see our video, Setting Up a Workspace for Background Dyeing, the Shading Blending Technique, and Detail Work. Select from 16 pre-mixed Eco Flo leather dyes, or mix them together for custom colors. I've selected dark cocoa brown for the background, sunshine yellow for a base color on the letters and border, 3 different hues of canyon tan for the letters, and 2 diluted hues of forest green for the border. I want the background around the letters to be dyed dark. I normally do this first so I won't be distracted by dyes bleeding onto the background area while I'm adding color to the letters. But you can do background dyeing as a final step if you prefer. I'm using full-strength cocoa brown leather dye. Use an eyedropper to transfer dye from the bottle to a dye palette. I'm using a round number 4 fine point sable brush. Dip the tip 1/2 way into the dye. Touch the tip to a paper towel and then a piece of practice leather to remove excess dye and to form a tip on the brush. Always begin in the center of a backgrounded space, then work towards edges and into corners. Learn to control the dye's natural tendency to bleed. Let the project dry a few minutes before continuing. Add another coat if necessary until the desired color is achieved. For more on background dyeing, see our video, The Basics of Background Dyeing. When coloring any project with dyes, remember to always follow the basic coloring rule of thumb. Work light to dark. My lightest color is yellow, so first I'm going to apply a base coat of full-strength sunshine yellow leather dye over the letters. I'm using the wet brush technique. This technique involves applying dye with a heavily loaded brush to obtain the most even or full use of the dye tone. Apply the dye heavily, allowing it to flow over each letter. Then let the letters dry completely. I'll be using 3 hues of canyon tan over the base color. Transfer dye from the bottle to a dye palette with an eyedropper. Be sure to mix more than enough of each hue to complete your project. Use a separate clean eyedropper for the water. For the lightest mixture, I'm using 1/4 dye to 3/4 water. The middle mixture is 2/3 dye to 1/3 water. The darkest hue is full-strength dye. Test your dye mixture formulas on a piece of practice leather, the same leather you used on your project. Allow mixtures to dry completely so you can see their true color. To achieve progressive coloring, you will need to use the dry brush technique. Dry brushing involves removing most of the dye from a brush, then stroking the brush lightly over the surface of a design, allowing only a very small amount of dye to penetrate into the leather. Try tooling several practice letters on a piece of leather cut from the same leather as your final project. Then practice dry brushing to get a feel for the technique. Experiment where you want to change from one hue to the next. Then practice, practice, practice. Use the lightest mixture to begin the progressive coloring effect. Decide on the direction of the color progression. I want my letters to be dark at the bottom and progressively get lighter towards the top. Notice how I'm allowing some of the base color to show at the top of the letter. Learn to control the dry brush technique to give you the fade you want. Color each letter using the lightest hue of canyon tan before continuing with the next mixture. Remember, let the dye dry completely between dye applications so you can see the true colors. Now I'm adding the middle mixture of canyon tan. Again, work from the bottom of the letters towards the top, but fade the dye out only halfway up and then stop. Work one letter at a time and keep the levels of fading the same on all letters. Be sure to let your project dry completely so you can see the true colors and the actual color progression. Now I'm adding full strength Canyon Tan. Work from the bottom of each letter up, but fade out only 1/4 of the way up. Let the project dry completely so you can see the true progressive color blend. To enhance the border around my lettering project, I'll be using 2 diluted hues of forest green. Transfer dye from the bottle to a dye palette with an eyedropper. Use a separate clean eyedropper for the water. For the light mixture, I'm using 1/4 dye to 3/4 water. For the darker mixture, I'm using 1/2 dye to 1/2 water. Test your dye mixture formulas on a piece of practice leather. Allow mixtures to dry completely so you can see their true color. Apply the lightest diluted forest green mixture over the lower part of the border and fade up the sides using the dry brush technique. Add the darker mixture for effect. The bead border can be shaded so many different ways, from the corners out, along the bottom and sides as I'm doing, just on one side of the bead itself, or beginning in the middle of a side and working out. You can use this coloring technique on letters, monograms, logos, borders, skulls, animals, flames, flowers, leaves, or any other tool design. Be creative with your coloring. Experiment. Because progressive coloring is a delicate technique, I recommend using a protective spray top coat finish such as Super Sheen spray rather than a brush-on finish to avoid smearing or rubbing off color. For more information about coloring using Eco Flo products, see our book, Coloring with Eco Flo, and our how-to videos.